Hello everybody and welcome to our In Focus BU webinar, Always BU, Conversations and Connections for Mental Health. My name's Sarah and I'm joined by Carmen and Susan, part of the Early Childhood Australia BU team. BU is a national initiative led by Beyond Blue in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace and funded by the Australian Government. BU aims to transform Australia's approach to supporting children and young people's mental health in early learning services and schools from birth to 18. Our vision is that every early learning community is positive, inclusive, and resilient, and a place where every child, young person, every educator, and their families can achieve their best possible mental health. So, part of that vision is that BU is a collaborative learning community for educators who are supporting the mental health and wellbeing of children. And being part of this community means that your learning is really critical. So this webinar is an opportunity for you to learn together with us and us to learn together with you about how you can support wellbeing, mental health and wellbeing in your learning community. Participating today in our online learning community so that you can learn and be inspired by the ongoing process of how you embrace Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander pedagogies or ways of knowing, doing and being with a focus on mental health is part of what we're going to explore a bit further today. So I'm going to ask Susan if she'd like to do an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Sarah. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we're meeting today across Australia. And for myself here, the Mandandangi people of the Maranoa region here in Roma. I uphold the elders past, present and emerging, and all the wisdom that they bring to what we do in this space of BU and mental health and well-being.
Thanks, Susan. One of the things you'll notice today is throughout the webinar on the screen is a number of symbols and resources that support our learning and our thinking. These have been inspired by our work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and like Susan said, we really want to pay respects and acknowledge the work and the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to this work that we bring you. The symbols come from a resource called Learning on Country, which you can find on the website as well. So as I said about the symbols, one of the other things that we really think is important in BU is that we take care of ourselves. So we'd really like you to focus on making sure that you are safe, so acknowledging the make safe symbol, and that you can be safe to be who you are, that you can work with your strengths, you can explore and express your opinions and views and ideas safely and feel heard and respected. Sometimes even when other people have some different ideas, and I think that's really important that we acknowledge that. One of the things also is that when we're doing self-care, we also take care of each other as well. So as we talk about our conversations will be focused around mental health today. Sometimes unexpected feelings can emerge, some things that might pop up for you, and sometimes they might be difficult. So be aware of those feelings, and if they come up for you and you need to talk about them, then please make sure that you do that in the most appropriate and relevant way for you. The other thing I'd like to do is just to walk you through our online space. And this is a bit of housekeeping, I guess. So if you've been to one of our webinars before, I'm sure you'll know how to manage this space. So this is slightly different from our national check-in online platforms. So the way that we'd ask you to contribute and provide your questions and thoughts is via the question box. So you can pop in your questions there. And I'd like to also, while we're doing that now, acknowledge that Rita and Leanne will be responding to your questions and sharing some of your responses with us and with the rest of the group. So the other thing is that you are in listen-only mode, so you aren't able to contribute verbally. So if you can do it in the question space, that'd be really great. If you have any technical difficulties, there will be a customer care number available to you, and so please make use of that number if you have any technical difficulties, sound problems, all of those kind of things. So just also to let you know that any links or resources or references will be shared with you in the chat, so you'll see them coming through as we relate, as we have our conversation. But there will also be, and there's also a handout that you can access, so you can click on the handout and download that now if you'd like, or you can have that available to have a look at later. Also to let you know, there will be some reflective questions, and that all of these resources will be available to you at the end of the webinar, along with a recording of the webinar. So if you haven't had a chance, obviously if you're live and able to access it now, but if you want to share this with your team later on or something like that, then you'll be able to access a recording and all the handouts. The other thing that you may be familiar with if you've joined us before is that we'll have some polls. So, really love to hear your ideas or thoughts via the polls. And when they pop up, please encourage you to provide your responses that way too. We're also now going to make the attendee list public, so you can see who else is here. See if you know anybody who's joining along with you in this online space. I think that's one of the exciting things about being online, is that we can sometimes catch up with people that we distance-wise can't, or location-wise we can't connect with, but online, in the online space, we can make those really great connections. And lastly, just to let you know, because you're attending live, you'll get a certificate of participation and a recording of the webinar at the completion. So let's get on with talking about the content of this session is going to be. So today, I guess we really wanted to have a yarn, a bit of a conversation, and explore how we can take a collective approach to celebrating, acknowledging, and considering the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures in our learning communities, and make some of the connections, I guess, to some of the work that we do. So some of the connections to the early childhood priorities that you might have and the requirements, but also really think about how this connects with your unique early learning experience. So I'm going to hand over to Susan to explore that notion of conversation a little bit more. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. What we're going to talk about today is conversation and what conversations play, the role conversations play in what we do. And while we start to unpack that, I'm going to invite you to think about the conversations that you have had throughout perhaps this week, or the conversation you had recently, or who you had that conversation with. Was it with families? Was it with children? Was it with a colleague? And think about what entailed that conversation. And the reason I'm inviting you to be in that space is because conversations are a form of a pedagogy, a way we do things. And in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, their way of doing, their way of being, their way of actually living. And as educators, we have to think about all those conversations we engage in, and what thoughts we put in them, and what conventions or values that we put towards the conversations that we do. Carmen, would you like to give your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, conversations. I'm thinking, first of all, it's a way to connect to the people around me, if it's my friends or my colleagues at work. And through engaging in conversations, I can check in on them. I can also, if it's about exchange of information, but possibly the most important thing is really, it is a form of creating relationships and to feel a sense of belonging, to be with each other. Yeah, I think that's my first thoughts that came across my mind. But Sarah, maybe you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, Susan, you were talking about depends who you're talking with, what the conversation is like. So there's all those variations of conversation, and some of them are non-verbal. And so, you know, really knowing that there is we say that word often, and we talk about that word often, and we use it as a really important tool, but you know, how deeply do we really think about it, and how do we recognize it as a pedagogy? I was thinking there's a really lovely story from a director of one of the BU services that one of the consultants work with, and I think this might be one of your stories, Susan or Carmen, where they use a conversational approach to staff wellbeing check-ins. So every morning the staff check in with themselves, and then visually represent it on a board in their maybe in their shared team room or their staff room or something. It's done anonymously, but then the director can check in with that person throughout the day and have that conversation with them to support that staff's well-being. So they've got not just the verbal but the non-verbal way of exploring and expressing that well-being, so that everybody's involved in it. I think that's the other thing you said too, Susan, was about it's actually a way of bringing people together and connecting them as well. So I'm not sure if that was yours, Susan. Was that your service that you work with?
Yes, that was one of my services, and it actually prompts me to think about what entails an appropriate conversation. And when we're thinking in that space, we're invited to think further and say, all right, who am I going to engage with, and what will be appropriate in this context, with this person, in this atmosphere, in this setting. So that's why conversations are very, very important to engage with and to think about and to entail with. I probably have a question there. Do we have to be very intentional about conversations, Carmen?
Good question. I was actually, at the moment, I was also reflecting on, you know, being like a second language user, which brings to sometimes when we have conversations, how important it is to be aware of that maybe our conversational partner comes from a different background, linguistic background, cultural background. So there's a notion of making sure the other person understands what we're saying, that we tune in with them. And I guess that's the one part of being intentional in our conversations, to really be aware of and tune in with the other person. And being myself a second language user, I also know it's not just like translating words, but translating meaning. And while we're in this translation stage, it's so much about, what are the words for that? But when you transport meaning, how important it is to realize if the other person receives the same meaning, and also if maybe particular terms could trigger something. So that when you said, Susan, to have an appropriate conversation, and so being aware of cultural differences means also being aware of different terminology that's used and what the meanings are behind words. And I guess particularly when we're talking today about mental health, that can also trigger thoughts in people, and can even have a negative connotation for some. And so it's really important to make that safe space and find a common language, whatever we mean with language. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thank you. And I think that, did you have anything else to add, Sarah?
I was just going to say, I think Marie has popped into the chat the Stop, Reflect, Act model, which is perhaps a really good model to help you, you know, so pausing. The two things I was thinking, just to wrap up, were, you know, how important it is to be fully present. And that's really hard to do when we're busy working, or, you know, when we're distracted by a whole lot of other things, or even overthinking what we're supposed to be saying or trying to achieve in the conversation. So, you know, trying to suspend that. So the Stop, Reflect, Act model can kind of help you with that a little bit, to stop, take a breath, be really mindful, really present, and not feeling like we have to rush and answer something straight away as well. So yeah, I just wanted to finish up on that. So back over to you, Susan.
Thank you. And probably in your own space there, you can start thinking about what can I use, how can I use BU to help me build my capability around having appropriate conversations, and what resources can I use, and how can I further develop my practice to ensure that the conversations that I'm engaging in on a day-to-day basis are actually appropriate and are handled in a professional manner using the yarning pedagogy. That actually leads us into our next part of the conversation, which is about yarning. Over to you, Carmen.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so I'm just thinking when we heard about the conversation that we started today, and thinking about the ways particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have engaged with for thousands of years, really using an oral tradition, an oral mode of communicating and engaging with each other. And so when we talk about conversations with this in mind, that brings up for me the particular way of having conversations through yarning. And when I came here 6 years ago to Australia, I hadn't heard about yarning, and I first had to actually look up the word. And again, what I said before, it's so much about translating a word, but sometimes the dictionary might not give me the most important meaning. And so it was a bit of an exploration what yarning is about. And I don't know about in the audience, what your experiences are, what your understandings of yarning are. So I think we are ready for our first poll while we're having a conversation about yarning. So what do you know about yarning? Is yarning a common practice at your service? Maybe you don't call it yarning, maybe you call it something different. So how do you yarn? If you have yarned or considered it, which of these statements that you can see in our poll best described your concept and practice of yarning?
It's interesting, Carmen, isn't it? Because we have been using our yarning pedagogy in our national meetings when we come together. So, you know, and each time it's slightly different, and each time we learn new things, and but we're committed to doing it. I think that's one of the important things is, you know, having a go at doing it. So yeah, we'd really like to hear from you. And if there's nothing on here that you that work for you, or that you've got some other ideas, pop them in the question box, and we'd love to hear your stories as well. Susan,
Sarah,
have you had any other experience? Sorry, Susan, have you had any other experiences of yarning?
Well, that's a really lovely question. For me, what comes to mind is that yarning is a conversation where there is no wrong or right answers. The core to that conversation is always deep listening and connecting and embracing everyone's views. And that can be quite challenging in the day-to-day lives where we may have different opinions. So I think for me that's what that yarning practice or yarning pedagogy feels like to me, is that we really have to embrace each other's views and listen deeply and connect with everyone.
So we might close the poll now. Thanks, Maria. And there's the results. So, it's interesting. So most people have had a little bit of, well, there's a little bit of response from everybody. So some people have actually participated in yarning, and that picking up that point, Susan, that they consider everyone's voice and learn from in collaboration. I think that's really important. It's a great way of doing that, not just with children, but with us as educators and adults as well. And in a profession, we can use that in a professional way as well. And interesting, some people are still learning how to yarn and finding out more about it.
And you know what, Sarah, I think that's a really important stage to be at, that we are aware and conscious that we're on a learning journey, and that we can ask. So like when you said, just have a go, that's one thing. not to be afraid or anxious about it, but also to consider who you can ask in your local community and to see who are the elders, or maybe I have a connection to someone who can then introduce me to an elder, so I can learn more about the yarning protocols that are particular for that local area. I guess what we also acknowledge here is that when you said, Susan, for example, that there's not a right or wrong, it's also that there are many different ways of yarning, and that can really differ from one community to the other. And I guess here, that's where it comes back to that notion of deep listening and really being there, so we can actually learn from each other what the protocols are. Often protocols are maybe not something that are written down, but actually emerge through being and doing it together. So we can actually observe and learn what's the most appropriate way, but also to be sure that everybody's voice is heard. It's a very transactional activity, and I'm so appreciative that I am engaged in many yarning circles at BU.
It's interesting. We've got a response from the from someone. Oh, it's Jennifer, I think, that said that they are really thinking about how they make their first contact with children in the mornings, about how greeting, you know, as part of that first interaction is about how the children are feeling. So maybe picking up on what we were talking before about how that director does staff wellbeing checks that Jennifer's talking about, how they do that with their children in the morning, and they talk to the children about how they're looking forward to seeing them and being with them during the day, rather than making a comment on their shoes or their pretty dress that they've got, or, you know, those kind of things. So, you know, really, and I think that goes back to that notion of being intentional, isn't it? Like, you know, what is it that we really want to make our first contact with children all about, and our first greeting, and what's our focus going to be? And just changing it, you know, just changing it, that's almost slightly, because you're going to greet the children in the morning anyway, but that's a lovely thing to do. There's some really great clips, aren't there? I've seen, you know, teachers doing those really cool, they would go around social media, you know, there's really cool greetings with each individual child as they walk in the door. Yeah. And someone else was asking, oh, sorry, Susan, you go.
And also important to remember that yarning doesn't have to be verbal always. It can be silent. And maybe for you as an educator, you can adopt that pedagogy to how you do things, how you engage with children, and knowing that not every child is going to be verbal or loud. Some kids are learners. You can use the yarning pedagogy to tap into their learning styles or conversational styles of your colleagues. Not all your colleagues are going to be very audible or wordy when you're a meeting, and that is okay, because it is a platform, it is a space where everyone belongs, and that actually aligns very well with our BU vision, being the best that they can be, being the best that you can be.
Someone's asked a question about how you would start or introduce a yarning circle. And it's interesting because we haven't actually mentioned yarning. Oh, well, we did in the poll questions, I guess, but we haven't actually talked about the notion of circle. So even that is you know, does it have to be in a circle, I think, is something really important to think about and explore. You know, I think there is a sense of perhaps turn taking or everyone participating. So we kind of obviously sit in a circle so that can happen. But so that's my first question about that. But then I guess, Carmen, or maybe I'll ask you, you know, have you got any thoughts about how you might introduce it?
Oh, good question. And with the circle, I was just thinking the circle is a beautiful symbol in so many cultures to bring people together, or something is, you know, it's a safe space. It's also being able to see everyone, which probably has then benefits to listen to everybody. At the same time, you have to consider that in different cultures, it might not be as important to see everyone or can look into each other's eyes, because that differs dramatically, and in some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities that might actually really not be the case. So, but where I'm from, it's showing a lot of respect to look into someone else's eyes. But I still think that circle, that symbol, that it's almost very, not primal, but it is really something that is almost universal to cultures. And so I think using a circle can be a great way of being with the children, so they can see everybody is here, and it is probably also something familiar being in a circle, and then introducing slowly, like, okay, this is something special where we want to listen to everybody's stories. And children often know talking circles where it's maybe someone has a talking stick, and so they learn to take turns. And you could then slowly transition into a yarning circle where those props are not needed, because the children take on those respectful ways of being together and learn how much listening to each other's stories is a beautiful way to, for example, start the day, as one person posted in the question box.
You got
Susan,
any ideas, Susan?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We talked about yarning, and I think this is going to lead us really well into our next slide, making connections. We did talk about yarning as a pedagogy, a way of doing things, and you can adapt it to your practice and what you already do and believe in. I guess for me, the most important thing is to understand what's going to entail appropriateness in that context. So if you're welcoming children, for example, in the sign-in area, you don't have the opportunity to sit down and have a yarn, but that does not stop you from adopting some of that pedagogy and embedding it within what you're doing, being respectful, listening to when a parent is, sharing with you what that child's day was about, or when you are engaging with a colleague in the staff room, you might not be seated in a circle, but you can adopt that pedagogy of a yarn, which is based on deep respect, listening to each other, and connecting and making sure that you are appropriate depending on who you're engaging with. So it goes back to where we started. A pedagogy of a conversation, a professional yarn. And I'm going to invite Carmen to lead us into our next conversation about making connections.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think just to follow that up again, when we think about yarning and our pedagogies, how much there is this space of trusting each other and taking the time, and also giving time for those careful listening, tuning in, and learning with and from each other. And like you say, Susan, it's not about if we are in a circle, it's about the way of being together. And to think about the connections that we can make, I'd like to invite you to think about why is making connections actually so important when we talk about mental health and well-being, when it's about mental health and well-being in our learning communities. And it's with connections, it actually takes connectedness, not just to make connections, but to develop and nurture relationships in our community. And we've already started sharing making our always be you symbols. The one you see at the moment is about making connections, or it's called Connect. And so you can use all of the always be you resources and those symbols when you're bringing culture, connections together, and gain and further your confidence for mental health and talking about mental health. And it's so much about bringing a mental health lens to everything that you do, and also from different perspectives to all the work we do together. So think about what connections actually inform our pedagogy. And feel free to use our question box to engage in the conversation. And don't forget, conversations can be verbal, they can be written, And maybe you're doing non-verbal conversations in the space you are at the moment. And Sarah and Susan, I'd like to engage with you. What you think, what connections inform our pedagogy? Maybe Susan, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, that question just takes me back upstream on Torres BU resources and how they kind of provide a really good avenue to bring together culture and practice and principles together, and maybe in this space for you as an educator, that's why you can't think, well, I'm inviting you to think, how can I connect what we have discussed so far with my practices? Or how can I connect what we have discussed so far with the principles that underpin what we do on a day-to-day basis? And where do I start from? Or if I'm already embracing a bit of this pedagogy, how can I develop it further? How can I upscale it further? Sarah, are those the lines along which you're thinking?
Yeah, I've been thinking about connections at another level too. One of the things about BU that I think is really important, and actually one of the best bits about BU, is that it and so always BU is a part or a resource within that sits within BU more broadly, is that it's really critical, and it's also one of our always BU symbols. It's really critical to acknowledge what you're already doing. And so, and I think that's what you're saying, Susan, like there is already a whole lot of things that people are doing that you can build on. You just need to stop sometimes and see what they are and acknowledge our strengths. And we're so busy going, oh, we're not doing that, we can't do this, looking at the stuff we're not doing yet, that we forget to stop and acknowledge the things that we're doing really well. And so I think that's part of what this work is. And I agree with you, Susan. It's about how we use some resources perhaps to help us find the space and to make some decisions about where we go next. So, all of this work would fit really closely with the National Quality Framework, the work you're doing around your quality improvement plan. So any of these things would be, I would see as being integral to that work as well. So both the work you would be doing around mental health for children and always BU, tools and resources to bring in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and how you might bring those things together. It's really hard to, and this is the making connections, it's really hard to sometimes see those things fitting together, because you're like, I do my QIP over here and I do my early years learning framework over here, and then I'm going to do the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander bit over here, and then there's all these other bits that I have to do. But how you bring them together is perhaps the more complicated bit. And one of the other things that we've got in BU is that if you're a registered early learning service, so not just as an individual you can sign up and do the PL, but you can say, let's do this in our whole community, in our whole early learning service. You have a consultant or a group of consultants who you can work with, so you can network with other people, like in this online space. So that's another form of connection, is that professional conversations that you can have in this online world to find out what other people are doing, sharing stories about, oh, you did this and you made that connection here. So I guess that's what I was thinking about. So back to you, Carmen.
And then another layer of connections could be with your pedagogy of space. They're thinking about the resources. How are you connecting your theory, what you're knowing now in your head, with how you're going to set up your learning environment? Or how are you going to use what you know now to engage with BU and think about additional things you can put in place to support children's mental health and well-being in a better way? Think about the resources, think about the spaces you're going to create for them. So connections can actually have so many layers to them, and they can weave in and out of so many different areas of your practice on a day-to-day basis.
I love that notion you just mentioned, Susan, with weaving all these things together, and rather than thinking, oh, another thing on top, but seeing how your quality improvement plan your requirements and priorities coming from the National Quality Framework, from the Early Years Learning Framework, how these are all coming together and how the resources you gain from BU can support you in that work that you're already doing. And bringing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives to the work that you do, for particular around mental health and well-being, it's not just honoring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's actually making it a part of all the things that you're doing and supporting everybody's mental health, every child, every educator, every family, every community member, basically. And so while we're respecting what we can learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it is about supporting everybody's mental health and well-being. Now, how are we going in time? We could talk about this just for a whole hour, I think.
That's probably a good segue over, but perhaps Susan would like to talk about reconciliation plans in particular, because I think that there is some tools that we think people can use. Oh, is that the next one? Have I jumped ahead?
Yeah, you jumped a bit ahead. It would weave in really nice.
Before I talk about reconciliation, I would like to just briefly mention, based on our previous slide, that the connections can also be with the national quality standard. And I'm very well aware that all of you are working with the quality standard. And actually, there's quite a number of quality areas that you can link BU and the Yarning Pedagogy and Conversations too. But most importantly, it also links to exceeding theme number 2, which is about practice being informed by critical reflections. And pedagogy, Yarning itself gives you the platform to engage in those conversations in a critical way, whether you're self-reflecting or you critically reflecting with your colleagues. It's a really, really good platform. And on that note, I would like us to talk about reconciliation and where this fits in terms of reconciliation. And before I proceed, I just would like to talk to you about
Susan,
in what ways
about,
that's your go on, Carmen.
I was just wondering, before we really make the transition to speaking about reconciliation, because you mentioned again the exceeding themes of the quality improvement plan and critical reflections, those always BU symbols, by the way, you find them in the e-learning on country book on our website. You can use them actually for your critical reflections, and they help you to put a particular focus on reflecting when you think about, for example, what are the aspects in our overall quality improvement that we want to look into, what are our strengths and what are our learning opportunities, and think about deeply which of the, for example, quality standards we're already meeting really well and what are the ones that we're still working on. And I really believe that BU can support you so much in that space because it really aligns with each other, and thinking about how we're creating this inclusive learning environment where everybody feels respected and heard. So yeah, have a go and use those always BU symbols for your critical reflections.
We are jumping around a bit, and I think we're missing a slide, which is what's thrown us a little bit. And looks like, Susan, I think we've still got you, but you've frozen on the screen. So just to bring us back to where we're up to, I guess the other thing I was thinking about is that there are very strong links to the Australian curriculum as well. So if we're thinking about curriculum links, not just for the Early Years Learning Framework, but with the Australian curriculum, as well, so cutting across those early years into those early years of school. So I think this work fits with that as well. And again, you know, making sure that one of the fundamental aspects of BU is that it's a framework that applies to your context. So making it work in your context and making curriculum decisions based on what's right for your context is really important as well. So I think it looks like we don't have the reconciliation slide. So, Susan, if you want to just quickly talk about how, well, maybe we'll just move on to how the cultural competence fits, but just to acknowledge that if you have a reconciliation action plan, we would encourage you to use the Reconciliation Australia website and the Narragansett website to support you to do that work. And again, make those connections and fit it in, and not make it and feel like it's another thing to do, because I think working through that process alongside of the other things you do all can all dovetail together. So we might just move on to this conversation about cultural competence. Susan, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. The word culture competence, or the words culture competence, bring a lot to thought. And I'm sure all of you there are starting to think, oh, what does that mean? Yeah, it sits in our quality area 6. What about BU? How is BU linked to cultural competence? And maybe I have a few questions that I want to throw out to you now is, what does it mean to be culturally competent? And how do you support your cultural competence? And what does that look like at your service? For some of you who may have families of quite diverse, culturally diverse backgrounds, I think this is going to be a very exciting space for you to start thinking about what happens in your space, or what underpins your cultural competence there at the service, or in everything that we do. A few things to think about: being aware of your own views. That's actually an indicator of culture competence. Developing positive attitudes towards others and whatever cultures that they represent. Being knowledgeable
Susan,
about different culture perspectives.
Sorry, Susan, should we put the poll up so while you're talking, people can be exploring as well? So sorry, I interrupted you. We'll just pop the poll. You keep talking.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're just thinking that there's so many ways, so many practice indicators of what culture competence entails, or what it looks like. I was just giving a few examples. It also involves skills for communicating across different cultures, and perhaps also in the space of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and our theme today for the webinar, Yarning, it also involves understanding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and being able to draw on their ways of doing, being, and use those to inform what you do on a day-to-day basis. Carmen, did you have any additional views of what culture competence entails?
I forgot to unmute myself. That's what's happening when you have conversations online. Look, I think it's really an interesting or really important aspect when we work in early childhood education to bring in cultural competence, or I don't know if I want to call it competence, but to be really culturally aware and respectful towards cultures, and to embrace all the cultures that come together, which then supports making children feel belonging to the group, and feel respected in the space. And it's really has so much to do with embracing diversity as well, and showing fairness to everybody who is part of our community, and to provide strong values to our children. Sarah?
Yeah. Thanks. We might have yeah. We'll finish the poll and we'll have a look at the poll results in a minute. And I'm with you too. I'm not sure about the language of cultural competence. I think that's a contested language, but the concept of it, I think, is really critical. And we've used this other term here, cultural safety, and there's also, a whole range of different words, but cultural competence sits within some of the language of some of our documentation. So I guess it's what we go with. But I think it is very much about who I am, and that's reflected here in our poll results, I guess. is really recognizing and understanding my own culture and my own cultural background. And I think it's really easy for someone like me who's white, Anglo, with an Anglo cultural background to say I don't have a culture and other people have culture. And that's actually the bit I have to reflect on, and that's the bit I have to know and understand. And that's where we have that, it's really important to have those conversations about history and knowing a history that isn't just reflected from my cultural perspective. And so, really exploring this in your space and in your in each of your contexts, to have that conversation about what does that actually mean for us? What does that look like for us? How do we do this is really important, I guess. And then bringing the, again, it goes back to conversation, it goes back to connections, and understanding all of those things and how they all fit together. So back to you, Susan. Thanks.
Yes, thanks.
For your
And
responses, everybody.
That's
just
very
close the
correct.
call now.
That what you exactly said, Sarah, is true and correct, and I think it's very important for us to remember that that word culture competence can have so many interpretations, and be mindful of the jargon and the wording. It could be culture responsiveness, and also knowing that it's not going to be the same in each context. And I think that's the core of it there, that when you are responsive, you're going to be ready to embrace whatever it is and whatever makes sense to those people. Again, using our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in a very respectful manner and in a way that makes everyone safe. And it's important to go back to your service and say, okay, what does that mean for us here at our service, based on the families that are using our services, based on our BU practices, and what we believe in. What does that entail? How can we unpack that? And it can sit differently in terms of, even, for example, when we ask children, for those of you where children have to families have to provide meals for their children on a day-to-day basis. It's a really very exciting space to start being culturally responsive to the different families and what they really value in an ethical way. And even when you have to unpack a conversation and say, look, that's not really, you being here asked to support children to develop healthy eating habits, and a family saying, no, this is what we believe is good food. Again, having that conversation in a very professional manner without breaking or making anyone feel unsafe is very, very important. And I think what Sarah said is correct. It starts with our own views of how we see the world. And then once we are really competent in who we are, we can go out and embrace others' views. That actually leads us into next.
So yeah, just go on to the next one, Steph, because we already jumped through the action plan. So if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk about pedagogy. Yeah. You want to keep talking about pedagogy, Susan, and how, because I think that relates very, very closely to that work around pedagogy.
Thank you. Pedagogy, of course, we've already looked at as everything, what informs everything that we do on a day-to-day basis with the children, with ourselves, with families, the choices we make on a day-to-day basis. And I think the question here is, how do you make your decisions about the pedagogies you choose? Like the pedagogy of yarning, how do you inform that? The pedagogy of space, how do you inform that? Pedagogy of communication and connection, how do you inform that? Or better to say, how are you going to use your knowledge of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives to inform all those different pedagogies that inform what you do on a day-to-day basis? Carmen, did you want to add to that?
And unmuting. Yeah, it's also so much about thinking about those really underlying principles of our work, and thinking about that we believe that everybody is unique, and being grounding our work actually in knowledge that we gain together, and also embracing the different perspectives that come together. And I think, you know, sometimes you can be challenged when different theories and perspectives don't align with what we've thought is the one way to do things. And I guess Western ideas can be different to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives quite a bit. And so it's also always on having ongoing conversations and reflecting, and not saying, but this is how we always done things and it worked well the last time, because it might not suit to the new context and the people that are in the context and the learning community that you engage in right now. So it's really important to always reflect and continue the conversations and sharing with each other. Oh, and I see we have another poll coming up here. Do you want me to say anything to that?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted as well. I was talking and no one could hear me. So we'd really like to hear those things about your pedagogy. And I think what we saw on the slide before this was, you know, it's around the decision making you make. And the question we had on the slide, or the comment we had on the slide, was in ways that embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. And that's the critical element of this. And I guess that's why, and I was thinking when you were talking, Carmen, it's kind of, and this is one of the elements that I think is really powerful and I really love about yarning, is that it's cyclic. And so we've talked about conversations and how important it is to have talk with each other about these things. And so, you know, again, we go back more deeply, and someone said, you know, asked a question about, can we really be value free? Well, I don't know, can we? But it's about how we talk about that together and have those conversations. And the other connection we've made too is that we talked about connections. So how can we connect things together? So kind of what we've done in this, you know, as we've gone along today, we keep going back to what we've talked about, but we're kind of deepening it each time. So I think, you know, if we can think, I wonder if we do that with our pedagogy.
Good question. And for me, I'm thinking now about the curriculum decisions we make, or you make, on a day-to-day basis as an educator. In the questions for the children, for families, and those curriculum decisions that are going to involve the community. And some of the examples that come to mind are collaboration. How do I collaborate with parents? How do I collaborate with children? How do I collaborate with my colleagues? How do I plan? Sarah did mention about planning, reflecting, and evaluating. How do I embed all those into what I do? Another practice example that comes to me is the richness of the learning environments that you're offering. Do they offer exciting possibilities for children? Are they going to fill them with wonder and curiosity? Do they involve spaces for mental health and well-being, for chilling and relaxing? Or do you plan for children to have deep, extended play, or conversations with their peers, and all conversations with educators? So when it comes to curriculum decisions, we invited to think about all that. And I'm going to invite Carmen to probably talk more about how BU can be related to that.
Thanks, Susan. And I'm also having a bit an eye on the clock, which is usually not my thing. I like to talk and talk and talk. But I think I would love to highlight again that you can use all the Always BU resources, but also the other resources we offer on the BU website to inform your decision making for your daily practices, for curriculum decisions, and also your pedagogies that are in place, and reflect on them and reconsider how they are inclusive for everyone. And also, I loved when you said that, Susan, with like filling the children with wonder and curiosity. And one more thing that came to my mind throughout the webinar is that yarning with children is such a powerful way of engaging with them in really big conversations. And to have the children's voices heard in terms of the curriculum decisions that we make providing a space for them to have a say about what makes them feel safe, what are the spaces and environments within our early childhood education settings and school settings where they feel good about themselves and where they can seek help. I think a yarning can be a really strong way for that. So I guess with only 6 minutes left of our webinar, we should come a bit to an end of our conversations, which is really sad. There, I can see you again. That's lovely. But just keep in mind when you have those conversations in your teams to think about what makes a conversation professional and make connections between your professional conversations and the yarning pedagogy. That's something I'd like to give you on the way. And think about involving the children in those big conversations that you have. Now, maybe I should hand over to Sarah for wrapping it up a bit.
Thanks. I was just going to comment on the poll responses, and I guess it wasn't surprising that lots of people had said partnerships with families and also supporting children's learning. And it was really interesting that cultural competence was quite low. And so I think, for me, pedagogy and curriculum decisions and professional conversations are around what is it that we want to know or do, and how's the best way to do that. And I think, if you wanted to have cultural competence as something that was given higher priority than those other things, and it's hard because you want to try and do everything, but I found it really interesting that was so low. So maybe that's something to go away and reflect on is, what would happen if we were more culturally competent, that is more aware of our own cultural values and biases. What would that do to our pedagogical decision making and that kind of thing? So I guess that was just in wrapping up. I was just interested to see that in the poll results. So I guess, as you said, Carmen, we are coming to a close, and I really want to finish up and thank everybody for their participation. And I guess this symbol, again, we're coming back, and again, that's a cyclic effect of coming back to the Always Be You resources. Hopefully you'll feel like you have access to them, know a little bit more about them. One of the things we would really encourage you to do, and I know I've worked with some services who have developed their own symbols, because remember, symbols are a way of communicating and sharing and doing this work as well. So, thinking about what your symbols might be if you were using the Always Be You resources, and also think about how that then embeds into everything you do. So as we finish up, I'd really like to hear from you, Susan, about what your highlights have been and what's one thing you are going to take away, think differently about, or know differently after doing this webinar.
Thank you, Sarah. I think my main highlight was talking about conversations and seeing how we have taken that conversational approach throughout this webinar. And I'm thinking I would love to really ground that practice within what I do at both a personal and professional level. Always approach things with that conversational approach, underpinned by listening, active listening, listening deeply, respecting, and knowing that there will always be alternative views, that might not be my view, but it's okay for me to embrace an alternative view. And the other thing is probably thinking, I can use so much. BU is so flexible. I can actually place it in so many things of what I'm going to do on a day-to-day basis as a practitioner. So that was my take.
Thanks. What about you, Carmen?
I thought again about the weaving together of all priorities, requirements, and the resources that we can use for that, and really explore the Always Be You resources. And we actually haven't really much mentioned that there are also action charts, but so have a look at them as well. But even just like the symbols, to have that sort of reviewing cycle of thinking and planning that includes your requirements and priorities, and then after you take the actions, look at them back and reflect and critically engage with each other continuously, and use conversations for that.
Yeah, thank you. And what I've been thinking about, and to finish up, I feel like this is there's so many things we could have talked about more, and we would really want to have talked about more, and we kind of meandered off track a little bit before there, and then we had to come back on track. And I think that's important too, and to give yourself time to do that. And I guess remember that this webinar is one opportunity to have that conversation that we've been fortunate enough to have. And so I'd really like to thank Carmen and Susan for their contributions, and also the people who have been part of our team in the background. You would have been chatting with Sue, Maria and Rita and Leanne, who have been responding to some of your questions. And I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to them all, but just to let you know, as I said at the beginning, all of these resources are going to be available for you at the end. The webinar recording, you can listen back again. There'll be handouts as well. And so you can use that and maybe have another look at it because you felt like you couldn't keep up with everything, but also share it with other people as well. The other thing you might want to do is connect in with us online at a national check-in, come and ask some more questions if you can't find the resources, all of those kind of things too. So thank you so much for joining us, for participating with us. Thanks to all the team for pulling it all together. Don't forget there's an exit survey, so if you fill it in, that'll be fabulous for us to hear your thoughts, and you'll get a certificate for participating as well. Let us know the names of people who might have attended with you if you're not sitting by yourself but sitting with a group. And yeah, thank you so much. We'd love to see you online again for another conversation, maybe in a different space. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.
And thanks, Sarah, for being such a great conversationalist. And thanks, Susan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.